Hi, friends, and welcome back to Between Bells and Barns. Today, I'm going to go over my garden planning for the year, something I've been asked about a lot. And so I thought I would share with you how I spend some time to do some planning on my garden, what all goes into it, what I decide to direct sow, or what I decide to plant ahead indoors under some grow lights, and kind of some of the decisions I make and how I decide what goes where. Um, so you can see I've got all this stuff out. I start out with a map of my garden to try to get an idea of where things need to be placed to get maybe some relief from the sun or need more sun, more or less water. Also, I start to look at what could be planted near each other for companion planting to help each other. So I've just a lot of different things that I think about before I just dive into putting seeds into the ground. So it should have started back in early February. I got started about mid February, got my seedlings started, and I got my map done. And that's what I'll share with you guys today. And then I also have my planner for the whole year, basically my to-do list, what needs to be done each month so that hopefully things don't pass me by. And I'll talk about some things that I also have kind of let loose on a little bit, not being quite so stringent on what has to be done, because it's real easy to get down on yourself when everything doesn't look perfect. And I decided finally that my garden doesn't have to look like a Pinterest garden. I'm perfectly fine with the fact that I will get some food out of my garden. That's really the intention, right? So my garden isn't necessarily, and I had to come to grips with this, it's not necessarily a picture garden. That's not what it's for. My goal out of my garden is not to take pictures. My goal out of my garden is to get food. And because I work full time, I have to give myself some grace on that. Sometimes it doesn't look perfect, and I have to be okay with that. So, otherwise, you just quit and you don't do it, and it's important. So, it's one of those things that you have to learn where to bend and how much to bend. Obviously, I can't let weeds take over too much, or the food won't produce. And so, I do try to manage it the best I can and get the most food out of it that I can. So we'll go over some different things and hopefully you'll learn something from it or compare it with yours. I'd love to hear comments on different things that you do, and maybe we can share and come up with some really great garden plans. So here we go. This year, my garden space is about 35 feet by 68 feet, and that's a lot of planting space. But the nice thing is that it's big enough to grow real food and still small enough that I can manage it if I plan it right. So let me show you what makes this possible for me while working full time. First, I use drip irrigation throughout the garden. If you're trying to water a garden like this with a hose, you will burn out. Drip irrigation is one of the biggest reasons I can do this. Second, I use a lot of T-posts and cattle panels for trellising. I also have 4 old livestock panels that I set up as a teepee, and I use those for vining squash or green beans. And then the last thing is I do a lot of planning, because when you don't have time, you need a plan more than you need motivation.
So I'm taking a practical approach. I'm using cardboard in the walkways and then covering it with wood chips. We chip mesquite from our own property, so I have a steady supply of chips. And wood chips aren't perfect. Bermuda can still push through over time, but it does slow it down enough that I can manage it. And where the weeds are getting really bad, I'm going to use cardboard and compost right over the top. Wheat cloth is expensive, and honestly, a lot of it doesn't last long anyway. Cardboard is cheap, compost is useful, and wood chips are free for me, so that's the route I'm going. So here's the basic layout I'm using this year. On the far west side, I'm planting sunflowers and okra. That's my heat wall. Then next to that, I'll have 2 blocks of corn, and I'm planting them at different times so the harvest is staggered, because I don't want all my corn coming in at once. After the corn blocks, I'll have my trellis rows. That's where the cattle panels come in. That's where I'll grow cucumbers, Armenian cucumbers, yard-long beans, matuta beans, and even Malabar spinach. Then closer to my entrance, I'll have my tomatoes, peppers, and eggplant because those are the crops I'll be checking and harvesting the most often. And then the cool season crops like lettuce, spinach, carrots, and beets will go in the east side areas where they'll benefit from the shade. And then in the northeast corner, I'll have a dedicated squash and melon zone because squash will take over the whole garden if you let it. So I'm giving it its own space and letting it do whatever it wants over there. So here's my month by month garden plan. February is where it all begins. This is the month where I start seeds indoors. I don't have a greenhouse, so I use small grow lights. And then as the seedlings get bigger, I move them out into a cold frame that I'm building. February is when I start tomatoes, peppers, and eggplant. I also start basil, broccoli, cauliflower, kale, and flowers like marigolds and zinnias. I also start slower herbs like parsley, thyme, and sage. And at the same time, I'm direct sowing cool season crops outside. That includes snap peas, spinach, lettuce, radishes, carrots, beets, turnips, cilantro, and dill. And I'll be honest, this is where I start getting behind already. Because February is also when I'm still working, still living life, still keeping up with everything else. So I focus on what matters most. I get seeds started, I get the irrigation checked, and I start laying down cardboard and chips where I can. Even if I only do one walkway at a time, progress is progress. March is where the garden starts to wake up. This is when I start transplanting my cool season crops. Broccoli, cauliflower, and kale can go out earlier than most things. This is when I also plant potatoes. And if you've never grown potatoes, they are one of the easiest and most rewarding crops. Next to sweet potatoes, that is. You can grow a lot of food in a small area. March is also when I'm preparing my corn blocks because once April hits, everything moves fast. So March is a big prep month. And I try to get trellises built and ready so I'm not scrambling later. April is my main planting month. This is when tomatoes go into the ground, and I'm growing several types this year. I have beefsteak, celebrity, Cherokee purple, early girl, 4th of July, San Marzano, Roma, and cherry tomatoes. So I'll have slicers, paste tomatoes, and snacking tomatoes. Then later in April, I'll transplant peppers and eggplants once the nights get warmer. April is also when I plant corn. Corn block number 1 goes in first, and then corn block number 2 a couple weeks later. And that staggered planting means I get staggered harvest. April is also when I start planting cucumbers, squash, and melons. This is where I really start leaning on the drip irrigation because if I'm planting this much, I can't also spend all my time watering. May is when Arizona starts getting serious. This is the month where I plant the true heat lovers. Okra goes in, cowpeas go in, yard-long beans go in, Malabar spinach goes in, and by May I'm also planting more squash, more melons, and more beans. And May is mulch month. If I don't mulch by May, I will regret it in June. Mulch is what keeps the soil cooler. It holds moisture, it reduces weeds, and it even makes the drip irrigation way more effective. So even if I can't mulch everything, I mulch the crops that matter the most, the tomatoes, peppers, and cucumbers, and the pathways. June and July are the survival months. This is when the garden can start looking messy. This is when the weeds can explode. This is when the squash tries to take over the world. And this is when the heat is intense. So I simplify. I focus on harvesting and watering. I focus on shade cloth if I need it. I don't stress if everything isn't perfect because at this point the goal is to just keep producing food. Corn will start coming off, tomatoes will start producing heavily, Beans will start climbing, and okra will take off. Melons will also start to ripen. And there will be days where I walk out there and I just pick what's ready and walk right back in the house because I don't have time to spend 3 hours in the garden every evening. And I've made peace with that. August is when I start thinking about fall. And this is where a lot of people miss their fall garden because it still feels like summer and it feels too hot. But if I wait until September, I'm behind. So in August, I start fall crops indoors: broccoli, cauliflower, kale, and lettuce. And I'll also direct sow things like carrots, beets, and radishes in areas that I can keep the soil moist. August is not a fun month to garden, but it's a necessary month if you want a fall harvest. September and October are like a second spring. The nights cool down, the soil is still warm, and suddenly everything starts growing beautifully again. This is when peas come back and greens come back. It's when root crops start thriving, and it feels like the garden is rewarding you for surviving the summer. By November, I'm planting garlic. I'm cleaning up what I can, and I'm letting the garden slow down. And then by December, I'm already thinking about the next year because gardening is one big cycle, and every year teaches you something. So that's my garden plan for the year. If you're planning a big garden too, I hope this video helped you feel like it's possible. You don't need a greenhouse, you don't need fancy raised beds, and you don't need perfection. You just need a plan and a willingness to start. If you'd like to follow along, I'll be sharing updates each month as the garden grows. Thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share if this encouraged you. And I'll see you on the next one.